In this video, we will review how to add and subtract rational expressions. This is a continuation of the previous video where we learned how to multiply and subtract. For adding and subtracting rational expressions or fractions, you do need to have a common denominator. Let's take a look at the first two examples where we would like to either add or subtract, and then we want to simplify our final answer like we did in the previous video. So we'll start with the first example. Notice that we actually have the same denominator. So for addition and subtraction, we do need to have a common denominator. And in this case, we do, so we can just subtract. So the way you want to do this is notice that you can factor the denominator. And so what we want to do is write our problem as one fraction. So I can just write one fraction with the common denominator. And then for the numerator, I can just subtract, and I just write 4a minus 12. And then from here, once you get to one fraction, you want to factor. That way we might be able to reduce and simplify. So for the numerator, I can actually factor out 4. And in the denominator, we can factor the trinomial. Once everything is factored, then we can reduce any common factors. One should be at the top and one should be at the bottom. And so I can reduce a minus 3 because it's common to both numerator and denominator. And so then we're left with our final answer, which is completely simplified. Same idea for number 2. Notice that we have the same denominator, and so what we want to do is just start by writing this as one fraction with the common denominator. And then we want to take a look at the numerator. So this problem, we want to be a little bit careful because we are subtracting. And anytime you subtract and you have a numerator that is more than one term, this is just one term. In this case, we have two terms. If you have more than one term, you have to distribute the negative when you subtract. So that's really important. And so what we're going to do is rewrite x minus 1, but we need to distribute that negative sign, so it turns into minus 2x plus 7. The negative sign applies to everything in the numerator, and that is why you need to distribute it. It's minus the whole quantity 2x minus 7. So to subtract, you have to apply or distribute the negative to both terms. So we have this, and then from here we want to combine like terms in the numerator and factor the denominator. Combining like terms in the numerator, we're going to get x plus 6, and then we need to factor the denominator. So again, that's a regular trinomial. And then notice that you have a common factor in the numerator, and in the denominator, we can reduce x plus 6. Once everything is reduced in the numerator, you need to make sure you write 1 over x minus 1. This is our final answer. Make sure that when you reduce your fraction that you have factored first. You should make sure everything is completely factored, and then you could reduce. Let's take a look at the third example. The third example, we don't have the same denominator. And so one thing you can do is remember that you can write 2 over 1. And And we do need to find a common denominator for these two examples, 3 and 4. And so we need to do an extra step. In this case, the only denominator is y plus 3, and so that will be our common denominator. And just like adding and subtracting regular fractions, you need to multiply the fraction, the second fraction in this case, by y plus 3. And if I do that, then I will have a common denominator. So then in our next step, I recopy the first fraction, and the second fraction turns into the following. Okay, so I have it written this way, and then once you have the same denominator, we're going to follow the same steps as example 1 and 2. Once you have the same denominator, write this as one fraction. And in the numerator, we're going to subtract. Again, right here, this negative applies to everything in the numerator, so we do need to distribute the negative like we did in example 2. I do not need to factor the denominator. It is already completely simplified and factored. I do need to combine like terms in the numerator. This is my final answer. Please notice that you can factor out a -1 from the numerator. And so if you do decide to do that, then you can write your answer a few different ways. So be aware of that. You can also write your answer where you write it this way. So we're factoring out -1, and we can write our answer this way. You can also take that negative and you could put it in the middle of the fraction. So really quickly, we can also write it this way, in which case we do not need parentheses because the negative is in the middle. So we could write it this way. You can also take this negative and apply it to the denominator, and in which case, if you do that, you need parentheses around y plus 3. Next and last example, number 4. We do not have the same denominator. So in this case, to get a common denominator, I actually need to factor whatever is not factored. So I can factor x squared minus y squared. So we have to factor first and then find a common denominator. That's a difference of 2 squares. Okay, so everything's factored in the denominator, and now we need to find the common denominator. The common denominator is going to be, in this case, x plus y times x minus y. So we have to multiply the first fraction by whatever it's missing. It's missing x minus y. It already has x plus y. So we'll just multiply by x minus y, the first fraction. When you multiply, you have to multiply the numerator and the denominator. I'm going to actually do that in the next step so it looks neater. We do not need to do anything to the second fraction because it already has the correct denominator. So I multiply by x minus y. And then we can write down what we get. We get one fraction with the denominator x plus y, x minus y, and in the numerator, 1 times x minus y is just x minus y plus y. And we just need to simplify here. And when you simplify, we're left with just x in the numerator, and the denominator stays the same. And this is our final answer.